Hello and welcome to Contra Mundum. I'm your host, Pastor Andrew Isker, and please welcome my co-host, CJ Engel. Hello, CJ.
Hey, Andrew, and welcome to Eric.
Yes, welcome to our guest, Eric Conn, a man who needs no introduction, but I will introduce him anyway. He is a pastor, one of the pastors at Refuge Church in Ogden, Utah. He is the CEO of New Christendom Press, and he is the host of the Hard Men podcast and one of the hosts of the King's Hall. So welcome, Eric. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen, for having me. Andrew, Dick Buckus, pleasure to be here.
That's right. Yeah, that's... Yeah, I get that a lot for some reason. I don't know why. I don't like the Bears, so I don't know why. But nevertheless, let's begin. Let's dig in. This past week, there was a lot that happened, actually. You know, I've joked around before. Nothing ever happens. Nothing ever happens. This week, things happened. So this week, on Tuesday, the former president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, was indicted on 34 felony charges, and they were all just like copied and pasted. But 34 felony charges in New York City by District Attorney Alvin Bragg. And so, CJ, how do you feel about that? What are your thoughts about the indictment of Donald Trump? What does it mean?
What is it? Well, it's very disappointing. There's been no coverage of it, probably because, like everyone expected, there was nothing to it, and so
Yeah.
there's been like almost no commentary on it that's worth even talking about. I mean, the run up to it was really interesting, and there was a lot of promise. There was a lot of buildup of energy and excitement about the fact that we finally got the worst guy to ever preside in the United States, and turns out that it was basically this complete nothing burger, which everyone sort of expected. And at this point, it's just kind of routine. This is just kind of what we expect from the regime. This is just how they behave to their political enemies. I guess the most frustrating aspect is the entire conservative movement, which typically is taking this what if the shoe is on the other foot type approach to the situation, without realizing that, well, maybe when Trump was in office, he should have been conquering his own enemies. I mean, Hillary Clinton herself could have been jailed. That's what he promised. Why didn't he deliver that? There was far more legitimacy for pursuing her than there was on these things. But the left operates with a very politically realist perspective, and the conservative movement just cannot even approach things that way. That's my overall take.
Yeah, what do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I think the best take I heard on this was from my 15-year-old son. I was reading through Twitter, and I said, Trump's been indicted. And he didn't even raise his eyebrows, and he goes, again? Like, they're going after the guy again, But exactly the same thought is that I think, if anything, this probably helps whatever political ambitions remain for Trump. It's kind of this weird interplay, right, where they keep going after him, but they're the ones who keep putting the spotlight on the guy. And so far, he seems to be like Teflon Man. Nothing sticks.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the crazy thing is, like, I saw, there's a tweet from someone today. I wish I could remember who it was, because I like giving people credit. But it said we could keep track of literally every penny that the Trump campaign and Donald Trump himself has ever spent on anything. But we'll spend hundreds of billions of dollars in Ukraine, and we have no idea where any of that money goes for any of it. It's just so absurd, and all of this, like, he's been scrutinized so much, and literally the only thing they can get him on, the only thing that they could possibly bring charges against him for, is that he did not use campaign money to pay off a whore. Like, that's what he's being charged.
I'm actually surprised.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised, because my own instinct is just that all these billionaires, they're kind of shady in terms of, like, their the way that they file and the way that they report and stuff. I'm actually surprised this is all they had. Like,
I know.
I legitimately thought there would be something, interesting,
Anything
worth talking about.
Yeah, and there isn't. But like what you said, CJ, is really important. Even though we're kind of like fatigued by it. There's this like regime fatigue that sets in where it's like this is what they do and they have all the power and it's just constant anarcho tyranny where they're attacking their enemies and doing all this stuff. And you just expect it. Like you just expect this is what they do. These are the things that they do. They're gonna attack the president of the United States. But if you're able to step back for a moment and just think about the hundreds of years of history of the United States as an independent nation, nearly 300 years, that nothing like this has ever taken place in American history. And we had part of the country break off for a few years and set up their own independent country. And they never did anything. Like they didn't put Jefferson Davis in jail permanently. They didn't prosecute him even for treason. There was amnesty for that. But a guy who challenges the regime in whatever sense, even in this like ineffectual way, like there were all sorts of mistakes that he made, things he didn't do well, but just to raise any type of challenge to the regime, particularly in foreign policy, and the gloves completely come off. He is an absolute enemy, and he must be destroyed. Like they didn't do this to Nixon. They didn't put Nixon in jail, and he certainly was an enemy that they did a coup against, like Trump. He was kind of a proto-Trump. But they didn't put him in jail. They didn't do any. They didn't put any other president. Plenty of presidents could have ended up in jail. I mean, honestly, in the 20th century, most of them could have gone to jail, and none of them did. Partly because it's a big club and you're not in it. Part of it is because like normal stable countries don't do that ever. And we are no longer a normal stable country. And part of it too is, I mean, we have to bring up also on Friday. I think it was even more last Friday, right after really right after we recorded last week's episode. The Ricky Vaughn trial wrapped up, and Ricky was found guilty. I mean, again, another absurdity. I mean, they brought the trial to Brooklyn, New York, and the only reason why is because with this like strained logic, like it's like reading from the Talmud. That literally, I mean, it's like in the Talmud they say you could string, houses together, and that then you could violate the Sabbath if they're all connected by a wire. Well, their argument for why Ricky Vaughn should be tried in Brooklyn, like the bluest of blue places in America, is because the internet cables, the fiber optic cables that carried his illicit memes, ran through Brooklyn, New York. And like that was their logic. That was their rationale for why they tried him there. And so it was a kangaroo trial. It was obviously he's a political prisoner. It's a ridiculous joke of a trial. And I don't know if you guys know this, but like he committed this supposed crime, but there were no victims brought forward. There were no people that said, "Hey, I tried to vote." And if those of you who don't know about Ricky Vaughn that are listening, it's the trial over text your vote to Hillary memes, and there wasn't a single person they brought forward in this trial that said, "Hey, I tried to vote via text and I would have voted otherwise, but I thought my vote counted and I didn't get to vote." Not a single person they could find that did that. And so what do you guys think about the Ricky Vaughn case? Because I think it's a watershed moment in American history, a new epoch. But what do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I think the biggest concern is when you have, it's like all the rest of this stuff. I think people are getting, especially if you're conservative, you're getting discouraged because you're watching what happened with Twitter and Facebook during the last couple election cycles. I mean, you want to
Mm-hmm.
talk about voter suppression, like that was actually certifiably happening. Elon
Mm-hmm.
Musk, Twitter files, absolutely nothing is being done about that.
No.
And then all the research you do on the Ricky Vaughn stuff, you're like, he did some bad things and said some things. Just trust us. We're not going to tell you what that is,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they involve memes. And I don't know if you guys know, but memes are like dealing crack on the street corner. They're bad. Okay. Can't do it. So we're going to take this guy out. And I legitimately think, though, this is where the rhetoric, I've seen a lot of the rhetoric where a lot of people are just at that point where they're like, I've had it with this.
Mm-hmm.
You have all these government entities that are being weaponized against the people. And I think people are sick and tired of it.
Oh, absolutely. CJ, what do you think about Ricky Vaughn?
Well, yeah, I agree. I do wonder if they need this as sort of a precedence case, you know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the memes were a lot more influential in 2016. Um, and there's a lot of what would you call it? Just like an anchor on the online right. Its ability to really shift priorities and really influence politics. But I do wonder if they need this for something planned in the future, because they have to set precedents.
Hmm.
And I think the online right is going to be agitated by this. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next election cycle there were thousands of people trying to just do same thing, just sort of in defiance, just to kind of agitate and do the same thing, in memory of Ricky. It's just the fun of having that memoriam, aspect to of it. But I think there's going to be a lot of people that are look, we have nothing left. You've destroyed our communities. You've destroyed our cities. Come get us. And they're all going to do
Yeah.
this. And so I think these types of things are going to happen, and the tension's only going to grow from here. But I wonder what kind of internet crackdown, related to, like, democracy rhetoric, is going to be
Hmm.
coming down the pipeline on these things, because obviously they can't afford to have another Trump. They can't have, and,
Yeah.
and the next Trump is not going to be, a New York liberal real estate developer. You know what I mean? Like,
No.
there are strains on the right that could push even more radical, and they need to squelch that. And I do think that this is sort of a sign of things to come.
Yeah, I think we have um, video of the true victim of Ricky Vaughn's crimes here. We'll play it for you in a second.
A guy who had been one of the main, I guess he was one of the main people running memes against me in 2016. But he went from that to running a very deliberate effort to mislead people about where and how to vote.
So based.
So it went from speech to action meant to subvert the election, because thousands of people who
Wait, action meant to
Speech
subvert
to
the
action.
election? Are you kidding me? What?
Hillary
What?
Hillary Clinton is going to be on her deathbed, and she's still going to be reliving 2016. Coming up, she's going to have this master list of all the people
Yeah,
that did her wrong,
yeah.
caused her to lose to Donald Trump. He's living inside her head, just like everybody who, in any way, opposed her in that year. It's one of the greatest legacy of Hillary Clinton's participation in American politics.
Oh, it's amazing. And we'll let her finish here.
they targeted through their algorithms. Oh, I
Wait, hold on. Ricky Vaughn had algorithms? He's controlling the Twitter algorithms? anyway, she's just using words she's heard before. It's text sounding. It's hilarious.
can text my vote for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thousands texted their vote. A guy.
Actually, nobody texted their vote. People texted that number, but nobody didn't vote, because unfortunately, I really wish he would have swept in a bunch of low IQ people that wouldn't have voted, because that would have been better. But honestly, I mean, one here, I mean, I'll speak for myself. I don't believe in democracy. I think very, 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 very few people should have political power or any say in politics whatsoever. People that are really that can't even run their own lives, are not capable of running their own lives, should not have any say in my life or your life. So if you're not bright enough to realize that a silly meme with a guy with an Avi wearing a Trump hat is saying you can text your vote to whatever number to vote for Hillary. If you're not smart enough to see that's what's going on, you should not be voting. You should not. You have no reason to be voting. Please stay away from the ballot box. Don't do it. That's what I think. Like I right here, I'll go on record. I am anti-democratic. I don't believe in democracy. Democracy is bad, and so I'll get that out of the way. Number two, Hillary could. When you have hundreds of millions of dollars of campaign funds, you have these things called lawyers that work for you, and these lawyers can write these special letters called cease and desist, and you could send a letter to Twitter, you could send a letter to the user Ricky Vaughn, you could send a letter to all of these people and say, don't do this, we're suing you over copyright infringement and all sorts of legal mumbo jumbo that she personally could have done, but instead she was really lazy or just really evil, actually both, and used the Department of Justice as her personal lawyers. And she did this also, of course, with the Steele dossier, which, going back to Trump, she should be in jail for. She paid a huge fine over using her campaign money to pay for the Steele dossier. She should be charged with 34 felonies over that, but she paid a big fine and it all went away. Trump, on the other hand, is being prosecuted in, again, also the state of New York and the city of New York. And so, I mean, again, it goes back to the anarcho-tyranny. We've talked about this before in the show. The regime plays by different rules for different types of people. There is no equality under the law, and regime enemies are going to be prosecuted heavily if you defend yourself using force. I mean, Kyle Rittenhouse was a regime enemy. He didn't know it, but he was a regime enemy. He fought back against pedophiles that were trying to kill him, and that's not allowed. You can't do that. You just have to let the pedophiles kill you if you are one of us. And so he didn't know those rules existed. Now we know them, and so that's the system that we're currently under, and it's important, I think, for people to understand this. But CJ had a really good point about Ricky Vaughn, also known as Douglas Mackey. I like using Ricky Vaughn because that's how we should remember him as the poster. Ricky Vaughn, that's right. That's right. But CJ had a great point about what it means, why he was prosecuted in the first place, because there's a lot of people on the right, on the online right, that could have been prosecuted in the same way, but haven't been. So, CJ, what do you think about that?
Well, I also want to hear Eric's take on the Hillary clip too, but just
Oh, yeah.
I guess real quick, I guess. Well, I just find it fascinating how many people have been indicted or brought to court or approached by intelligence over their participation in anti-regime activities. We won't get into some of the people, but they're walking free, and I'm just curious why he was given jail time over this, and it's not my Bronze Age pervert. He's the one that I got this idea from, but he basically
We disavow him completely.
but my view, I agree with him. I think that he was offered a deal.
Yeah.
And he rejected it, and he said, "I'm not going to play your games." And so they went through with the persecution of Ricky Vaughn, and now he lives in our memory and motivates our own political action going forward. But I also want to hear Eric's take on just Hillary Clinton and just
Yes.
how angry she is and how easily it is to live inside her head rent free.
Yeah, good old Hillary. But you notice too when she was like, it went from thoughts to actions to, and you're like, this is not a preschool classroom. Maybe it is though, given Andrew's comments on democracy.
That's right.
Maybe she actually realizes who she's talking to. But
That's
yeah,
right.
I think so much of it is like you wonder with people who lie for a living, and Hillary Clinton would be one of those people when she's like, they ran a campaign to mislead people. And you're like, okay, you can't honestly look in the mirror every day and not be like, oh yeah, that's Steele dossier thing. Like you don't.
They were trying to mislead people?
They're trying to mislead people. You do that for a living. So one of the things I think that we have to do inside our camps is actually go back to some simple principles. Number one, like Jacques Ellul and propaganda. We need to teach people how to read propaganda. But also, I have a lot of buddies that came out of the special forces intelligence communities, and they've all said very, very similar things. Namely, you need to teach people what information operations warfare is and how to respond to it. Because Hillary Clinton's not stupid, but they know how to use the media to distort reality. And I think that's where you gotta look at that incident and everything that's going on. And I'm constantly asking, what's the play? And then be looking to people like, Bronze Age pervert, people who can help you see the play. I've never listened to them. I've heard people have. That's all I'll say.
I don't know what, I have no idea what you're talking about. Any of these things? Yes. Hello. Yeah, I mean that's part of it. Is like you see what happened. I mean, going back to 2016, you had and speaking of Jacques Ellul and propaganda, you had this enough decentralized information where people are able to get access to information outside the finely tuned, highly crafted narrative that is in the mainstream. And it broke everything down. I mean, it broke everything apart. The fact that like the Podesta emails came out, the fact that I mean, there were so many questions about what she had done as Secretary of State and all sorts of things like that with the servers and so forth. I mean, all of her criminal things. Like in previous presidential campaigns, it wouldn't have been about that. It would have been about her like tax policies or like what she was going to do foreign policy wise or whatever. Which I mean, that stuff's important, but it's much more important to know like the actual crimes of this person and how evil they are. And the internet was not locked down then, and people were able to break free of these narratives and have a persuasive counter narrative. That's part of what happened in 2016. Part of what Ricky Vaughn did, and what made it persuasive is that it was so funny. Like the memes from 2016 were hilarious. Even this one was hilarious because I remember seeing it. I don't think I shared it. I don't remember. So I'll plead the fifth on that one. But it was. I remember laughing at it. I remember thinking, "This is hilarious. This is so funny. Like they're so stupid, the libs." But all these things were hilarious. I mean, making fun of her is really what happened, and humor is persuasive, right? Making fun of bad people that moves the needle. I mean, it really is meaningful, and that was what the online right did in 2016. Did extremely well, and that's why 2020 wasn't it didn't have the same spirit because it so much was going on where it was like it's hard to joke about the BLM riots. It's hard to joke about the bioweapon. It's hard to joke about this like senile man stumbling around on stage. I mean that's part of it. It's like Trump couldn't like take the gloves off like he did with Hillary with Biden because it's like you're beating up this demented old man. And because there was that one debate where he was doing his regular shtick, and it did come off at all well, like because Biden would just yell randomly back at him, and and it wasn't funny. It wasn't. I mean, I like usually I'll text buddies of mine that are not like super political, that are just regular grill Americans, guys I'll watch the Vikings with and have a beer with, and ask them about politics. And they're generally conservative, but they're not obsessed over this stuff like we are. And I'll ask them like, hey, what do you think about Trump? I remember 2016 asking these guys like, what do you think about Trump? They're like, he is so funny. He is hilarious. Like I'll like watch him on TV just because he's hilarious. And like you didn't get that vibe in 2016 from him, or 2020 like you did in 2016. Some of it is just the he was constantly under assault for 4 years. I mean people don't realize this, but like the generals, the Pentagon lied to him consistently about how many troops were where in Syria and in Afghanistan. Like he was trying to pull out of Afghanistan, and they just didn't do it. They said, "Nah, not going to do it." And they sent General Milley sent him a letter. Like you look this up, this letter saying if you command us to use troops against the rioters, we will remove you from office. Like I mean that like the United States had a military coup in 2020. That's what happened. That's what happened in our country. There was like he had no control over these things. And they're like, well, and then you'll have these people like who will be like, well, maybe he should have appointed better people to his administration, and then he would have had control. It's like you have no idea how Washington actually works. You have this permanent government that nobody is in control of. Like if Joe Biden was in office right now and was telling people what to do and he was some kind of threat, they wouldn't listen to him either. Whoever is in office, if he's a threat to the regime, they're not going to listen to him. And so that's why, I mean, I go back to this, like his indictment, and Eric, I want you to elaborate on this a little bit more, because I maybe disagree a little bit. I don't think this is, I mean, so on one hand, I think yes, this kind of seals it up for him. Like DeSantis doesn't have a chance after this indictment. All those things I think are true. But they're not doing like, because you'll have these like harebrained normie-con conspiracy theories where it's like, oh, they really want Trump to win the 2024 GOP nomination again against DeSantis, and that's why they're doing it. So it's like, no, they're doing this because, like, I mean, this is like Rubicon level stuff that they're doing. You don't do that to like rig GOP, nomination. You do that because he's your enemy that you want to destroy, and so Um, but I think like you're right. This helps him in that sense. But it doesn't like how do I want to put this? It doesn't um it doesn't allow him back into power any easier. Like they I mean they might put him in jail before November 2024. Like he might be in a cell on election day, November 2024. I mean it's very plausible that that could happen, even though apparently like the next hearing is in December. Like they're dragging it out too because they want to drag it out over the election season. Um, but yeah, Eric, what do you think about like what do you think about like what it means going forward? You know what it means because I'm again I don't think he can win, but I want him to go fight if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it really is. There's a couple things here. Number one, I don't think it helps him in the ultimate sense.
Yeah.
And part of that too, honestly, is during COVID, he made a number of enemies on the right. So
Mm-hmm.
one of those instances we were covering at the time, I was working for a media company in Alabama. We were covering, COVID and the aftermath and everything. And Trump goes down to Talladega, and he's given this, grand speech like he does, and everybody's riotous. The NASCAR crowd's
Mm-hmm.
happy, and then he's like, "Everybody go get vaccinated," and literally everybody started booing.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
there's enough of those. There's enough gaffes. There's enough.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody's coming after you and you actually have dirt or things that make you look, silly, stupid, etc. I think that can be problematic. I think the real problem, though, is that we do have some quality leaders on the conservative side of things who are actually based. But from my vantage point, most of them aren't big enough or popular enough. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you look at a guy like Thomas Massey, that guy is based. Okay,
Yeah.
I love this, but he's not in a position to make a move politically like that.
No.
I think they realize, look, who is the enemy going after most? It's clearly Trump. They hate the guy. But more than that, they recognize that he is a threat to their power. What I would
Mm-hmm.
be really interested in is some of the people who are jockeying, who are maybe just a bit off screen. We don't always get a view yet of who those people are going to be. I think years down the road, I think it'll be Don Jr. I think you'll have
Mm-hmm.
a whole cadre of other guys. When you look at Don, you follow. I don't know if you guys follow his social
Mm-hmm.
media, particularly like on Instagram. He's way more ballsy than Daddy. I
Oh yeah.
mean, and to a lot of conservatives, you're like, I actually kind of like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that'll continue to shake out. Trump's tough though. He's tough to
Yeah.
read. He was tough to read in 2016. I
Mm-hmm.
thought he would do well in 2020. He kind of moved away from his main messaging.
Mm-hmm.
We've all kind of documented that too. But where did MAGA go?
Yeah.
I don't know. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, what do you think, CJ? What does it mean for the 2024 election and going forward? I mean, do you think like I
I
do that there's not like whoever the Republican is, there's probably not a great chance. And I don't want to say this because people will blackpill immediately when you say that. I'm excited for the election. I want there to be this big fight, and I want that to happen. But what do you think?
I don't think Trump is handling things as well as he should.
Yeah.
I think his spat with DeSantis is important, but I
Hmm.
don't think he's handling it nearly as well as DeSantis is.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I don't think he's handling the whole indictment. Like, there's so much power. So on the indictment day, which was Tuesday, just out and about in my town, I saw so many people over the age of 60, more than I had seen in years, wearing "Make America Great Again" hats. It
Yeah.
was amazing. All these older people that you'd think that just generationally they're more susceptible to propaganda and narrative,
Mm-hmm.
media narratives. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they were relishing in this spirit of like sticking it to the man based on Trump's
Yeah.
indictment. That I think there's a lot of power there, and I don't think Trump is leveraging that appropriately. I mean, he should be cashing in on this in a way that's much more long lasting than he is. I think it's kind of petering out, and he should be cashing in on it, and not just in like a stupid like fundraising sense,
Yeah.
and covering his legal bills with it or whatever, which he's really good at, and I don't really have a problem with. I know a lot of people have a problem with it. I don't really
Yeah.
care. Like if he wants grassroots to pay for his legal bills, okay, whatever. That's
Yeah.
that's how they feel like they're participating. And plus it gets more people on the email list, and he can keep them updated and all that stuff. So whatever, that's fine. But I don't think he's handling the whole thing well. Like this should be like put Hillary in jail 2.0 right now.
Yeah.
This is it. This is and I do realize that there's a little bit of a difficulty because if he goes that route, they say, well, why didn't you do it the first time? But he should be addressing that. He should be
Yeah.
transparent. I should have done this. I should have done this. I didn't realize how thick the deep state was, but he's not doing anything like
No.
that. He's making these really cringe boomer posts on Truth Social with the
Mhm.
all caps. And I don't think that's really milking the situation for all it's worth, in my opinion.
Yeah, he hasn't had a sufficient answer for any of the problems, especially why should you get a second chance? Which I I'm perfectly happy, to say like right now, just because for the reasons that you said, CJ. I remember 2016 when I got on board pretty early, and a lot of people were like, why do you like him? Why he's bad? He's a bad man. And I'm like, because those people hate us, and they hate him the most, and so I want to stick it to them. I want I want him to go there and screw everything up for them because they hate us so much, and they don't want him. So whoever they want the least, that's who I want there. Like
Yeah,
he needs to
I
make
also
that message again. You know?
I also think that like it's actually important to vote for Donald Trump again, um, just because I think it's time to lay a precedent for having someone deemed a criminal by the regime as your
Yeah,
president. That is
yeah.
that is a huge statement. Like, I mean, having slapping the label of criminal on someone is something that the regime takes a lot of pride in.
Hmm.
But literally repudiating that entire course of action by saying, "We don't care," actually, that makes us want him more, is a
Yeah,
very powerful signal. I'm kinda suspicious of DeSantis, and I don't think Trump is doing a good job, but I probably would vote for him just because, look, to be honest with you, I've said this on Twitter, I think a real right-wing leader that's going to do what it takes to take down the regime is going to be deemed a criminal in the regime's eyes. That's
yes,
sort of where we're at as a
yeah,
society. And let's just get that precedent out of the way. Let's do it now.
yeah,
Let's do it forever. I mean, like, yeah, if the people wanting to change the gender of our children call you a criminal, let's get that guy in office.
yeah, yeah, 100%. And speaking of changing the gender of children, um there was a good video. I wasn't able to clip this video of also a guy that Big Eva thinks is a criminal, in Mark Driscoll. We've talked about him on Twitter. I have a little bit on Twitter, before Eric has as well. And he kind of defended him. Like I still don't think, I'll get this out of the way too. I still don't think this guy Mark Driscoll is like a good guy. I don't think that he's like, oh, should he be a pastor? Well, I wouldn't go to his church. I don't think I think there are things that he
Right.
did that he hasn't corrected, and so forth. So get that disclaimer out of the way first. But Eric, tell us about this video of Mark Driscoll and what he said, and why it matters, why it means a lot. But go ahead.
Yeah. So there's a lot of really, if you followed Mark, so he's down in I think Scottsdale, Arizona, pastoring a
Yep.
church there. Of course, 2014 left Acts 29, really was deposed
Yeah.
by Matt Chandler and company for what amounted to plagiarism plus meanness
Yep.
and being controlling and all the things you've mentioned that probably got him disqualified. So fast forward the last year or so on social media, I started noticing these posts as recommended posts for me. Apparently, that says something maybe more about me than Mark Driscoll. But yeah, so I started watching these, and as I was listening to him, I was like, okay, I don't want to hear from this apostate guy. Blah blah blah. He's been blacklisted. But you
Mhm.
listen to him, and they're super based. I mean, he is continuing his message on how screwed up sexuality in America is. Pretty much the Nashville shooting happened, and he came out and he was like, listen, the Democrats have nothing to say to me about guns. They want to cut the private parts off of small children. And they want to murder babies in the womb. I don't care what they think about firearms.
Yeah.
And it was just bold, and he's
Yeah.
been that way, just super bold, good on a number of issues. I will say as well, if you there's a few reels that I've seen where he's now, because he rejected Calvinism,
Hmm.
he is now spending a lot of time with like Stephen Furtick and some hyper charismatic people. He had a
Hmm.
guy speaking at his church, like Hyper Disby, like Christ is going to come back any moment. By the way, Mark, I want to say a prophecy over you right now. Guess what, Mark? You really are Nehemiah. You're the greatest. And so
Oh,
there's
thanks.
there's some there's some stuff like that that I think a lot of us would find questionable. But
Yeah.
my main remark on Facebook that I made, which I think is really interesting, I think there's a parallel with Mark and Trump, and it goes something like
Hmm.
this. Mark was holding back Acts 29 from going full woke. The minute he left, Eric Mason and Matt Chandler took it down the woke carousel. I mean,
Yeah.
down the tunnel it went. Well, I think there's a pretty strong case to be made. Mark is there, fighting this Goliath. And
Hmm.
as you look at the way the players shaped up in those movements, all the people who hate Mark, of course, you see them in the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, which was put on by Christianity Today, or as one of my friends calls it, Christianity Ashtray. It's burned down to the ground. But, all these people, we have a parallel, right? It's basically regime evangelicals who align themselves with Francis Collins and Fauci
Hmm.
and the rest of the regime doing the bidding of the regime. And by the way, they hate Mark Driscoll,
Oh,
who
that's
is
interesting.
opposing wokeness. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think if anything, one of my comments was it kind of reminds me of Samson. Samson had,
Yeah.
he loses his eyes, but he still knows how to take down the Philistine stronghold. And Mark, I'm not endorsing him. I'm really making an
Hmm.
observation. I'm saying it could be that he's one of the players like Trump that we all kind of were like, he's a little unsavory, but that he may be used to actually dismantle the woke establishment.
Yeah, I think going back to something that we said earlier about Jacques Ellul and propaganda and
Yeah.
things of that nature, and something that CJ said about how there is going to be he didn't say this, but like there's going to be an American Caesar at some point
Yeah.
that is not going to be this liberal real estate developer from New York, but someone who's extremely hardcore and at the very core of their being believes the same stuff we do. Um, and uh,
He's
some
probably
friends of
listening to the show right now.
maybe it's one of you. But um, I've had some friends that brought up this point that America, like propaganda in America. I mean, if you think about just the soul of America or the spirit of America, what America is like, the chief like means of I mean this goes back to like the second great awakening. Like the second great awakening I think is like the very core, the very root of America as a people. And what drives them, what moves them, all of that kind of stuff. And so the televangelist, right? The revival preacher, um that's the thing that is this propaganda means that really resonates with every American, is this kind of Charles Finney like salesman preacher. And Trump in some ways is kind of like that, although he obviously is not a Christian preacher, but he has those things. He's kind of like a stand-up comedian. And I think and Driscoll himself is also this way. Like he learned how to preach by watching Chris Rock. I mean, that's the famously how he taught you. Like he watched stand-up comedians. And it's like, oh, this is how I should preach because they're preachers. He's right, actually. So I think it's very likely that like who's the American Caesar going to be? It's probably going to be some guy who becomes a very very popular preacher in the future, and this goes back to also going back to the feds, going back to the regime, the narco tyranny of the regime, and everything else. Why are they so interested in Christian nationalism? Why are they so interested in evangelicalism? Why are they in it? Like you bring up Francis Collins. Why are they sending their talking points from the National Institutes of Health to like the Gospel Coalition people to recite? Right? Why do they care about this so much? Because um, evangelicalism is this massive threat to the regime because it's people that at the core of their being, though they don't understand it, like your typical evangelical in the pew doesn't get this yet. But what they believe in their heart of hearts is at odds with liberalism, it is at odds with all of the foundations of the entire liberal order. And so you have this group of people whose fundamental commitments are opposing what you believe, and they're very dangerous. And so they have to like nip these people in the bud, nip their leadership in the bud. They have to, co-opt the leadership of evangelicalism. And so if you get a leader that's an evangelical that's able to lead this faction of like 25% of the country, that could be meaningful and powerful, and that's where they're not stupid. I mean, a lot of them are really dumb, for sure. They're not stupid. They know that an American Caesar, actually, or a Paul Atreides, where is he going to come from? Is among evangelicals, almost certainly. Like they know this, and that's why they're very, very, very scared. That's why the slur Christian nationalist is they're trying to propagate it, and it's not working so well. But I don't know if it's actually Mark Driscoll though. I don't know if it's going to be him, but it could be somebody like him. Maybe it is. I don't know. But what do you think about that, CJ? I've gone on long enough, and I maybe I put words in your mouth about American Caesar. Maybe you don't want me saying that. I don't know.
I think Caesarism. I take that as a logical next step to where we are. I agree with that. Um, I don't know. I don't know if it'll be a preacher type. I don't know if it'll come out of evangelicalism. There are corners of evangelicalism that are pretty based. I'm a little bit more pessimistic. I think that's kind of they're so passive to the point of sort of like the Germans. They just have this like they're just full of self-hatred and they just hate their own
Mm.
culture and their own traditions. They just at some point you wonder if they can even be revived. I have that suspicion about evangelicals. I think the American Caesar, so to speak, will probably be more secularist. He won't attack Christianity, but will use it, um, for his own momentum. So I don't necessarily think it'll come out of evangelicalism. I think the age of the preacher leader is kind of past, in my opinion.
Mm.
But I do think that there is someone coming who's going to sort of absorb the overall spirit of frustration and anger and
Mm.
vengeance that has been permeated throughout Middle America. So he'll probably come from somewhere, like Arkansas, and he'll be ruthless. And I don't think he'll be evangelical in a meaningful sense.
Yeah, the other thing that's really interesting about that, CJ, is when you look at what works for Driscoll and what works for Trump, particularly among conservative types, I think conservatives are tired of the Mitch McConnell type conservatism. Like
Mm.
they want a bad boy, they want somebody who is a little rough around the edges. And it's interesting, as a Christian, you can look at examples in scripture. John the Baptist, he makes people very uncomfortable, especially
Mhm.
politically. So I think that you're looking for somebody who's a disruptor. I think the main problem with most of evangelicalism, though, is we have this culture of nice guyism
Hmm.
where it's
Mhm.
it's unacceptable to be Mark Driscoll. That's why, Beth Moore can be straight apostate like in her teaching. And
Yeah.
people are like, well, maybe it's not the best, but Mark he's out because it's on the spectrum of toxic masculinity.
Mhm.
So that's why I think what's so interesting was like the relationship between Trump and evangelicals, right? We all had to pretend to dislike him while voting for him.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the geniuses of the post Civil War regime is their ability to absorb like a lot of the rhetoric of Christianity, like love and justice, and like the the equal status of creation before God. Like they can use these Christian themes and really just like be subversive about it and pacify the entire. I mean, evangelicals, like white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, that is the base, that is the historic American voting bloc, and so their ability to leverage that against them and the evangelicals' inability to recognize that it was being leveraged against them, I think is profound. I think people are starting to talk about it more, but I don't think people realize um, there's a great phrase. I forget who said it. It may have been like Anthony Esolen or something, but he basically said that like American evangelical conservatives are basically the victims of their own niceties. They're
Yes.
so nice that it's used against them, and it was used against them to completely undermine their entire way of life and their future.
Yeah.
Well, and I think
I,
people like Rick Warren, right? There was a video that surfaced from 2008 where he was at Davos and he's giving this speech about how you can use the evangelical church to play the American people,
Hmm.
because they do have influence in our country. And you're right. I think there's just too many people in the church. Like, there was a number of people sounding the alarm on Russell Moore and Beth Moore and the
Hmm.
wokeness in like 2008, 2009, but nobody had the ears for it, right?
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to listen until like 2020, maybe. And now it was like, okay, yeah, they're charlatans. We got
Hmm.
played. But I think that, yeah, there's not very savvy on the conservative Christian part.
No, you see this. I mean, well, I I get to play the role of the white pillar here. But I mean, you see this that in because I shared or I think William Wolf is the first one to share it, recently on Twitter, the tweet of Donald Trump where where he says like uh Russell Moore is a terrible example for the evangelicals. Terrible guy, no heart. And like I remember that tweet when it came out, and like the
Yeah.
freak out of these people. And there's still a bunch of replies there of people that are like, "How dare you say that about Russell Moore? He's so wonderful." And it's true. I mean, he was absolutely right, 100%. And I knew like a year before then that Russell Moore is a snake, because I remember when he was like counter signaling that little old Kentucky backwoods clerk who wouldn't hand out marriage licenses to homosexuals
Yep.
after Obergefell. And he's like, "This is horrible. She's subverting our entire constitutional order." And it's like, I don't care. Why? Who cares? This is great. And so I knew like something was not right with that guy. And his opposition to Trump made it really clear. It's not because I mean, it was just the really sanctimonious, typical evangelical. "Oh, he's an adulterer. He's crude and rude and bad." And it's like, I don't care. I'm not voting for a pastor. I'm voting for a guy to fight these people. Um, and
Yeah, and it's
and
interesting
yeah.
with Russ too, because you had early on, you had things like in the OOs
Hmm.
where there was this huge push for like adoption among Christians, and it was
Hmm.
always multicultural. Well, you see where it went with globalism. You're like, well, that actually kind of makes sense why they pushed so hard. He wrote a book. They pushed so hard for that. It was, one small piece of undermining, some sort of cultural hegemony.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all. I mean, it's organized and coordinated. Like that's the thing people don't need to realize. It's not, and it's not like there's this vast conspiracy necessarily. It's much softer and more subtle than that. It's, "Hey,
Mhm.
would you share this article? Hey, would you push this?" Like it's these networks of loyalty. These networks of where he just there are people like the same thing with, like you mentioned, Rick Warren, where they want to be liked by the big dogs, right? They want to be in good with those people, and that's how it works. It's not like he has this huge bank account in the Cayman Islands that he's getting all this money. Maybe he does. I don't know. But
Maybe, I don't know.
most of these people can be bought for way less than money. That's what I'm saying. Is they a seat at the table is
Yeah,
more than enough.
it's
Yeah.
part of their definition of influence.
Yeah.
Like the fact that
Yes.
he was there speaking to the World Economic Forum or whatever it was, um, that to him is like his ministry.
Yeah.
Being there and speaking on their terms and
Yeah.
speaking to values and priorities that they hold dear to our heart. That's the definition of having an impact for him.
Yeah, all of them are that way. They think that
Mhm.
if I get a seat at the table, if I get to, I mean, there's the photo op of Russ Moore with Obama, and he's looking
Yeah.
like, and it's like, get you a man that looks at you the way that Russ Moore looks at Obama, right? Like, like it's so ridiculous, to see him
It's
there. He's
interesting.
just sitting there. "Oh, Obama."
It's interesting though, because that's really it even goes back to revivalism. I mean, who was the first
Yeah,
one to really be like that was Billy Graham,
yeah.
where he was like always the advisor, always in the White House, no matter who was president.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, that's carried over. And then I also think, and look at the way that these guys have all become one clique. You've got David French and Russell Moore
Mhm.
going to the same book clubs and gushing over each other about everything, and it's utterly disgusting. But I think the hopeful part is, and this is what's weird. Going back to Mark Driscoll, it's a lot of the big mainline charismatic people, the Greg Locks and the Mark
Mhm.
Driscolls of the world, who are most politically vocal on these issues.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. You had the MacArthurites who are all like, we don't do politics, right?
Yeah.
That's a different kingdom. We don't deal with that.
Yeah.
So that's really kind of been an interesting thing, and that's why I think a lot of people get uncomfortable.
Mhm.
But who actually has power? I think you talked about the CJ, where it's like the evangelical world is pretty small, especially if you're like Reformed or
Mhm.
MacArthur or something like that. But then a lot of these people got a taste of David French world, right? That whole genre of
Mhm.
Christian political conservative content is former conservatives dunking on conservatives to a liberal audience. Like, they just
Mhm.
figured out they had a bigger
Agreed.
audience and more money doing that.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's part of their mission. I mean, if you think about like the like the corruption of the idea of like spreading the gospel, like the gospel coalition is a bunch of people, coming together to like export this their own version of the gospel, which is basically just speaking to the culture where it's at, and giving themselves up to a lot of its themes and its priorities and its values. Um, and that's kind of like it actually makes sense when you think about the things that define their unity. They can't be united around things like, like culture or nationhood, or like a particular people. They can't be around all that, so they define it in this very like abstract universalist way. And so of course they're going to go down the same route as the regime. That's what it means to be a regime evangelical, in my mind, is to
Yes.
align your priorities with the regime's priorities and use the gospel to justify it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then you start looking at the talking points of these Christians in these circles, and you're like, wow, that aligns perfectly with
Right.
what the leftist regime says.
What a
Right.
coincidence! Wow, the gospel
Yeah.
just it fits perfectly with what they believe already. How about that? Oh, isn't that so great? Yeah, that's every single time that happens. Every single time. It's uncanny. But I think I want to go back to the point that you made, Eric, about um, yeah, the Greg Locks, the Mark Driscolls. I mean, Driscoll's kind of put himself, quasi charismatic, where it's like it's this revivalistic backwoods preacher type that
He's talking about
that
demons.
yeah, that is the opponent to the regime. And but because some of it is like they aren't in any kind of like formal structure where you have this big denomination or even a small denomination, pulling the strings for them, where I mean, you're kind of under the thumb, whether you want to be or not, if you're in some denomination. Whereas Driscoll's I mean, there's a double edged sword, of course. Um, but Driscoll's independent. He could say whatever he wants. Greg Locke is the same way, and these guys are kind of loose cannons, which comes with the territory of being these independent backwoods type preachers. Um, but it allows them the freedom to criticize the regime, and so I think again I was gonna try to white pill everyone, and I got sidetracked.
You
But
got black pilled.
yeah, that's right. No, I didn't. No, my ADD got the better of me. But yeah, I wanted to bring up that like the potential for leaders like this, but better, right? Better than Greg Locke, who's also is kind of a fishy guy. I think. I don't know
Yep.
all the details with that guy, but I've you hear things.
It's not good.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so it's like but the potential for leaders, that criticize the regime, that are somewhat independent, and that really rally people toward the right ends, in this religio political way. Like when you combine the two, which is that could be a whole show on its own. Um, but that's part of what we need is preachers. I mean, I said this from the pulpit on Sunday, that like the history of American Christianity, like America would not exist if it were not for the pastors in colonial America preaching about political issues, not trying to dictate policy from the pulpit, but saying like, here are things that are happening in our country that are wrong and sinful and bad, and this is why, like that, and leading their people. There is a precedent for that. It's gone by the wayside, but there's a precedent for that, and bringing it back can happen, and so the potential is there. It's just we need to develop the type of leaders, Christian leaders, to do that, to do that, and amplify their message, right? Get the message out there that um that you could have churches full of men who are not who are the opposite of this, like CJ describes, that this evangelical passivity, this conflict averse nature. I mean, I see it all the time. I mean, I see this where there are evangelicals, around me in real life that just do not want to offend anyone. Like, that is at the very core of their being, is I may never offend anyone. If you offend someone, that turns them off from the gospel, and they might never become a Christian, and you're dooming them to hell if you offend them. So you better not do it. Like, that's the ethos of evangelicals, is like, I'm gonna nice the whole world into heaven. Like, that's
I want
that's my whole thing.
I want to say something about the sociology of this, because I'm interested. Like, so in European history, the political societies were led along by the spirit of the aristocrats. They were led along by heroes. They were led along by great men, people who the people looked up to.
Yeah.
Things changed in modern Western history, and in America is sort of the fruition of that. But it's become this. It's led by the middle class. It's led
Mhm.
by the people that needs to look up to someone, but there's no one to look up to anymore.
Yeah.
So I want to read this quote from Richard Weaver, because he's critiquing like just the standard middle class bourgeois, who no longer has someone to look up to, and he basically just says,
Can you read it in a waspy, like, mid-Atlantic accent?
well, I listen to this book all the time, and it's read by someone with an English accent, and it's like the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, and I can't, like, so I would try
Don't
that, but
try it.
I'd probably break the microphone.
Is this from Ideas Have Consequences?
It is. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So he just says, basically, like, in between the aristocrats and the proletariat, there lies the besotted middle class. It's grown enormous under the new orientation of Western man. And then he describes them. He says this. He says, loving comfort, risking little, terrified by the thought of change, its aim is to establish a materialistic civilization which will banish threats to its complacency. It has conventions, not ideals. It is washed rather than clean. The plight of Europe today is the direct result of the bourgeois ascendancy and its corrupted worldview. So he's basically saying that there's no great men, there's no heroes
No.
that the middle class has to look up to. And since they're alone and they define the political order, most evangelicals, there's no high church in American society. There's
Yes.
no one for us to look up to that points to
Well,
the heavens.
there
And so
is, but
therefore,
it's been taken over. It's
well, yeah,
totally, yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's the next stage of the
yeah.
critique. But yeah, but when they don't have that, and you rely on these people that are basically visionless, you're
Mhm.
going to be able to take advantage of them by leveraging and flipping their conventions on its head, and
Yes.
taking power. And that's what you just brought up. Is this is how it transitions from the traditionalist hero down through to liberalism, and then now there's a new left that has basically replaced the old leadership of European society. And I think that the like just the contemporary middle class evangelical base, they don't have any. Like, well, their leaders are the regime evangelicals. They're the
Yeah.
representatives. They've completely betrayed them to the regime, and now they're basically just sopping up all the political power of the evangelicals at large. It's really sad. Anyways, I thought that was a good quote.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's even when you read people like Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, whatever you think about his horrible politics, I'll just say
Yeah.
what I think
Yeah.
about them. But the elites viewed, they said, we have wealth, power, and money, and we owe it to the people. Like, we're responsible to lead them
Mhm.
Mhm.
politically, religiously, etc. But you fast forward to our day, and I think people are starved for that. It's one of the
Mhm.
reasons I think that like the King's Hall has done well. I think it's why Moscow, Doug Wilson are doing
Mhm.
well because people are starved for vision. But I would also even go further. I would say that part of the vision that we put forward is Christendom.
Yeah.
It's not this smarmy little view of like we want to have a good church. No, we want to build a
Mhm.
Christian city, community, and ultimately a Christian nation. Well, when you start giving people that vision, you find that like people are starved for it. I
Yeah.
think
Mhm.
that's why, Matt Chandler is famous for saying, why did evangelicals that he told not to, why did they still vote for Trump? And he said they lost their soul. And I think what happened is the evangelical elites lost their soul and the people were
Yes.
Mhm.
starving. And so the
Mhm.
Yeah.
people were like, we will literally take anything and anybody who will push us in the right direction. Oddly enough, Donald Trump did more for middle class evangelicals than any evangelical leader in the last 20 years has done. He overturned Roe v. Wade for one thing, which I never thought would happen. And
Ever.
here's this
Yeah.
guy who's like nobody wanted him, from the elites.
Well, yeah, that is not only that, but I remember sharing a video of Trump at the World Series like a year ago. This maybe I can't remember when it was. It was like a year ago when the Braves were in it, and he's in it, in the big luxury suite, and somebody tosses a baseball up to him for him to sign. He signs it and then throws it back, and like the people go nuts. They go crazy, and it looked, and just the video itself, like he looked like a nobleman, right? He looked like a king, tossing something down to his people, and the adulation that they had for him was genuine, was real. And you see this, I mean, when he went to East Palestine and he bought all the burgers at the McDonald's for all the people, and the affection that he had. I mean, maybe he's great at faking it, he's a salesman, but the affection seemed genuine. Seems like he loves these people, and that's what people are starved for, is true nobility, is a true leader, who is a great man, who is hot, this guy who's up here, but leads his people, that feels this duty to his people, this obligation to be a blessing to his people. Part of like democracy just systemically doesn't produce that. It produces, it's the Hans Hermann Hoppe, argument that just like it's a machine to generate, the worst rising to the top. But we don't have true leaders. We don't have men of grand noble vision, and an obligation to their people. We don't even have, like, just even that phrase, our people. Like, we're not allowed to even think that. We're not even allowed to think of our people as America. Well, all 7 or 8 billion people on the planet could be Americans if they really want to. All they have to do is pass a test. And so, like, there's no idea of what a people is, for one, and two, but we don't have men capable of this. We don't. But again, to White Bill, like, before everybody stops and like says no, it's all over. It's all over. The White Pill is that the vacuum is there, the niche is there, the market demand is there for leadership, for men to lead. And I think, I see this. You see this. I bring this up. I bring up your guys' church there in Ogden a lot. I bring up like Chris Wiley, his church in Washington is doing well. Michael Foster's, and these are all men that have a very similar vision, men that have a vision where, again, rebuilding Christendom from the ground up, from the local out. That is a grand noble vision that people need and are desperate for. You see this. I'm writing, we'll plug all the stuff that we're doing at the end. But I'm writing this kind of response to the G3 guy who chimped out over
Scott Eniel, I think.
Yeah, over Christendom, and it was just so silly. It was the most facile arguments. It's really kind of pathetic that like these get trotted out, because it's like an insult to the intelligence of a lot of people. Because like I had a short thread on it, but just this idea that because Russell Moore would make this point all the time too, that nominal Christianity is bad because then you have false converts. And it's like, okay, yeah, you do have some false converts, but here's the other thing. It's a question of, not whether but which, and it's a question of compared to what, right? So
yeah, would you
right
rather
now,
have a bunch of pagan god haters as opposed to normies?
Like the nominal religion that governs our country is gay race communism. So do you want that? Do you want that dominating everything? Because what does that produce? It produces all sorts of unbelief. And like the other thing is, like, it betrays. CJ brings up sociology. It portrays this like the sociological root of liberalism, which is that everybody is like this 115 IQ and above person that's capable of thinking through complex philosophical ideas and arguments and things like that.
Are you saying they're not?
Some people are not. Some people just believe what they're told. This might come as a shock to you. but some
and
people
then and
just
then
believe what they're told.
and then they'll see a meme and they'll vote based on it. They'll send a text message and think it's a real vote.
You
Yes,
see, TJ, it's the way that thoughts become actions.
that's
That's what
right.
happens.
Thoughts to actions. That's right. Yeah, yeah. But really, and I brought up like, okay, like a huge chunk of the country thinks that like a little piece of cloth on your face is going to protect you from instant death. And if you take it off, you're going to die immediately. Like there's still people that like walk around today that believe that, and it's because they were told that and they sincerely believe it. It was imposed upon them, but the belief nonetheless is very sincere. And so like just the idea of how belief is formulated, like where belief comes from, it isn't like everyone is this tabula rasa with no influence on them from the outside, where one day you wake up and just you discover this is the stuff I believe. It's all sorts of beliefs are imposed on you, and they're imposed on you by from birth. Like there are tons of stuff that I believe today sincerely in my heart of hearts. I totally believe it because my parents told me when I was a little kid, and because my teacher told me when I was in school, and because my pastor told me when I was a kid in church. Like I believe those things totally sincerely 100%, and it's been reinforced over the years, but I believe them because someone made me believe it when I didn't choose it. So anyway, all this is to say, you have things being imposed on you from the top down all day long everywhere. The whole society is. How can you not see this? And then and then you don't see it, but you think like, oh, in Christendom, like having Christian stuff all around, having Christian ideas from the top down being pushed, that's bad because it might produce some people that say they believe it and don't. That's really
Well,
bad.
I actually, I wonder with all the like the woke left, how many false converts there are because everyone basically
Yeah, there's a
they have
lot.
to they have to repeat these phrases, but a lot of them don't think about it, and so
No.
it's just hegemonic to them,
Yeah.
right? So you're gonna get a hegemonic aspect to your society. That's what the definition of society is. You have to have
Yeah.
something that's base. You have to have something that's ingrained within you in order to operate within society. And then there's some people that don't want to say no, they don't want to lose their jobs, so they'll nod, and they're false converts. And so that's just part of society. Whatever society you have, you're gonna have people, the masses that have been absorbed, the hegemony, and then you're going to have false converts. But of course, the Gospel Coalition can't raise as much money under Christendom probably because there's not as many problems to solve and witness to. So
Yeah, that's
That's
right. We can have a well-ordered society with high trust and stability and very little crime. That would be horrible because we couldn't complain about racism and things like that. So, yeah, that's part of it is like people need to understand that um it just the function of having a society, you are going to have an official religion one way or
yeah.
the other. Like it's going to happen, and some people are going to believe it, some people aren't, but it's not whether but which. And so yeah, any thoughts about that, Eric? I ranted for a long time, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Obviously, Stephen Wolfe, I think, makes a really good case for that in the book Christian Nationalism. But the idea, and by the way, like we were raised on this in the SBC.
Yeah.
I was at Southern Seminary when Russell Moore was there. We were raised on this notion that the worst thing in the world was cultural Christianity.
Oh yeah.
I can remember Ray Ortlund saying, I pray for the downfall of the Bible Belt, and
Mhm.
meanwhile, these same guys, come to find out are actually cheerleading the left the
Yeah.
whole time. So yeah, I do think that fundamentally, if you're going to have any concept of what a nation is, yeah, there's always going to be levels of, nominalism. Um, but again, I don't want secular nominalism. I don't
Yeah.
want BLM nominalism.
Yeah.
hmm
I want Christian. I would rather have Christian nominalism because we know it's going to exist at every level. This is something else about that whole elite structure. When you think about somebody like Teddy Roosevelt, equality wants to flatten everything. But I think Roosevelt understood there's always going to be a hierarchy in society. That's normative. That's good. The question is whether you have qualified leaders and great men. And that kind of goes back to your other comment that we don't produce great men today. A lot of factors. You could look at the educational system as well, but whatever it is, we don't produce them.
Well, like the evangelical spirit really despises great men. They're
Yes.
taught
Yeah.
that great men, in fact, like the idea that there is a great man, that there is someone to look up to, is really antithetical to their whole paradigm. They need weakness. They
Yeah.
need flattening, and they need people to cater to sort of the worst among us.
Well, you see this with
Um,
their exegesis of the Old Testament. Like, I mean, this meme always gets trotted around, and then it's always, I'm actually about to preach on Second Samuel in a few weeks, and so the David a rapist meme, comes out every year. Is it that season already? And I still had my anti-Lent decorations up, but no, it comes out all the time, and the reason why, because it comes from this this stupid meme of like Noah was a drunk and David was an adulterer or rapist or whatever people want to say, and Moses was a murderer, and all these things. Like, their exegesis is like every great man in the Bible, other than Jesus, every great man in the Bible is bad, and we shouldn't follow great men like that because they're all sinners and
yeah,
they're
but
all
as
unrighteous men.
they,
They have to have this as part of their like
they
pathology.
yeah. Yeah, they need it because that's how they justify their own approach to the social sinners today. Like that's how
Yeah,
they justify everything. It's like you can identify with David if you're struggling with your sexual identity. You know what I
or
mean?
whatever. Yeah,
Like they need that.
yeah.
So
They can't accept this, and you see it like with their reaction to a great man. Like, I mean, in the like definitional sense, uh, like Trump. Like, here's this leader, and he's clearly very flawed, and they can't handle people liking him as a leader, and loving him, and being dedicated and loyal to him as a leader, because he's got all these flaws, and that there's like this cognitive dissonance that
well,
happens.
they hate loyalty. Like that's
Yeah,
that's like
yeah,
one of their talking points is like he's just appealing to his loyalists or whatever. It's like, okay, well,
he has them. That's
that's
good.
that's what people need.
That's how
People
leadership
are
works.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'll tell you that the truth of the matter is that the majority of people were created to be followers. That's just the
Yes.
fact of the matter.
it's
Yeah,
it's
and
it's okay. Yeah,
I think that's often lost too. You think about leadership, it's kind of like a vacuum. So if you tell people that you have to be a loser, you have to be a nice guy wimp,
hmm
does that mean that people don't get attracted to leaders? No, it means that when sometimes sometimes bad leaders come,
yeah,
they're more attractive because people are going to innately want that and they're innately going to follow. I mean, what is the old quote? I think it's like a Stoic or somebody like that, but they're like, listen, like when you look at a battlefield, like 89 people are cannon fodder. Like it's it sounds harsh, but it's like there's a few leaders on the field, there's a few movers and shakers, but the mass of people are, they're going to follow, which means that ideally in a good, just society, you would have righteous leaders.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, you see that. I mean, somebody shared. I shared it on Twitter today, actually. A modification of the Pareto principle, where it was like
Mm,
80, 15, 5, 1, and where I read it. I'm like, holy cow, this is exactly right. Where 85% or 80% of the people just are there. They show up,
yep.
and 15% they do some stuff, but it's really the 5% that take any action whatsoever, and really like the 1% that make everything happen. and
Yep.
and that's, I mean, and you see it across every possible domain. That's the way it is, and people listening to this, I mean, this will, this is like nails on the chalkboard to a liberal, to an egalitarian. All the stuff we just said here is like, no, you can't say that. Some people are followers. No, but that's the reality. Like, some
Most
people.
people most people subscribe to the show just for the voices, by the
Yes,
way.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. Please like and subscribe and share this with your friends. But no, really, like that's how, like, the liberal thinks, right? The person who subscribes to liberalism thinks is that all people are the same, all people are exactly the same, and any one of you could be part of the 1% of leaders, if you try enough or if you try hard enough. And it's like, well, some people can't, and that's perfectly okay. That's perfectly fine to just lead a normal life. Grill and watch NFL football and drink your beer. Don't drink Bud Light now. Apparently, that's it's very bad. That's transmission fluid. But um, but most people, it's okay. Like, but we were taught this. Like, I went to public school, and we were taught this in school, that any one of you, any one of you there in that kindergarten class could grow up to become president of the United States. That could happen, and you could become president of the United States. That'd be, and it's like, no, actually, no. None of you could do that, or any one of you could, if you try hard enough, could be in the NBA or be in the NFL. And it's like, no, I'm not gonna be. I'm not that good. I like football. I'm not that good, and it's okay that I'm not that good. I'm not gonna become Tom Brady. That's all right. And so, like, if you teach your children this, that, like, the good life isn't becoming part of the 1%. The good life is being faithful with what God has given you, and moving the ball forward wherever you're at. That's what God's calling you to, not to go be this great glorious man. And so this is a conversation. I mean, we could talk about egalitarianism and leadership and all of these things for the next 6 hours. I could just here by myself if you all leave. But there's plenty more to talk about, and hopefully we'll be able to have Eric on again really soon. But before we go, Eric, what stuff have you been working on? We've already mentioned the podcasts and things like that. You have the conference coming up. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we've got the New Christendom Press Conference. Will be June 8th through 10th in Ogden, Utah. You can go to newchristendompress.com and check out the conference details. Sign up. Love to have everybody out there. I think a lot of based people are going to be there, so it'll be a good networking opportunity. We also have a new podcast out, which is Haunted Cosmos. Everything is demons and black holes, and exciting stuff there. So we're trying to bring everything, including the paranormal, under the sovereignty of Christ.
I mean, I am worried about going out to Utah and like missing 411 type stuff happening to me. I'm a little worried about that.
We do have Skinwalker Ranch here, so you never know. There's a lot of paranormal whenever you get the cult of Mormonism happening. So
exactly.
That's part of the country we live in.
Wonderful. Well, CJ, what do you have for us this week? Any new posts? Any new Substacks? I know you got to get running here.
I think there's a couple new ones, but yeah, cjingle.substack.com, and then at Contra Mundum for Gab and Twitter. And so yeah, same as usual.
Yeah, and for me, I have a few more posts that are going to be coming up on Gab News, so news.gab.com. You can find everything there. I'm going to respond to the G3 guy talking about how Christendom is bad, and maybe also a little more World War II talk. And so keep an eye out for those things. And please, again, thank you for listening to our podcast. Please like, I say this not tongue in cheek. Please like, subscribe, share it, tell everybody about it. Tell them how CJ loves the voices I make. But for everyone here at Contra Mundum, we'd like to thank our guest, Eric Conn, and everyone, please have a wonderful, wonderful week. We'll see you next time.